Now, by faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain. By faith, he was commended a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. So by faith, Abel offered the better offering. What about Enoch? By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God through faith. What about Noah? If I understood it right in my readings, I don't think before the great flood they had ever had any rain. So I'm not sure that people knew what rain looked like at that time. But Noah, he was by faith, he was warned about things that had not yet been seen. In holy fear, he built an altar to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. So he was trying to tell people about that the rain was going to come, there was going to be a great flood. And he'd never seen rain, so he took the measurements, got the measurements from God, the precise measurements, and he began to build an ark. And you know, the world at that time was just full of sin, and you can almost wonder if people were making fun of him. What's this crazy man doing, and so forth. But he was obeying God. He had faith in God that there was going to be rain, and God was going to destroy the earth. So the Lord gave him specific measurements on how to build the ark, and specific pairs of the animals, exactly how to bring them in and how to tend them. Have you ever thought about spending so much time on the altar with a bunch of animals? In the ark with a bunch of animals. You might be scared of some of them animals. And I got to thinking there were snakes that went in there too. They had to go on there too. But the Lord, He kept Noah's family safe. Okay, what about Abraham? He was called to go to a place he would later receive an inheritance. So he obeyed and he went. Even though he didn't know where he was going, he stepped out on faith and he went because the Lord had promised him an inheritance. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. Do y'all like to go to places that you've not been before? Sometimes we do, but sometimes it can be a little bit, you can be a little bit standoffish about, going to a new place. But he left and he went into a promised land, into a strange land, and he lived in tents, and he just believed in God. And what about Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him? They had the same promise. They hadn't seen that. They couldn't believe the promise unless it had been faith in God, because God had said it would be true. Nowadays, if somebody tells you something, a lot of times I found out you can't trust anything. They're just saying it's just empty words. But if God tells us in His Word that He's going to do something, we can, take it to the bank. We can have faith in that. And we got to have faith in that. I know a lot of times we go through things and it's hard. It's hard not to have doubts and fears. It is. 15 months of the same sickness day in and day out. And it can really wear on the emotion. The devil likes to come in on you when you're weak and when you're down and when you're sick. But we've got to have faith that God is going to see us through. And I believe that God has a purpose for the way things happen and for why things happen. And by faith, Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah herself was not able to have children anymore, he was enabled to become a father because God considered him faithful, and he knew God was faithful, and he made that promise. And so, if I remember in some of the studies that we have been going through, Abraham was about 100 when he had the baby. And Sarah, she was what, 90? She was 90-something when when she had a baby, so, 90 years old and having a baby, and, they had faith. God said it. God told it in a couple different verses. God said it to Abraham several times. By faith, he was made a father. And so, from this one man, he was good. He was good. He had descendants. God told him you're going to have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. Have you ever tried to count the stars in the sky? Sometimes you can do that on a cloudy night when it's just a few peeping through. But just imagine on a clear night all the beautiful stars in the sky. What about the sand on the seashore? I wouldn't begin to even count the sand on the seashore because that's just so countless. There's no way you can count it. All these people were still living by faith when they died, so they still had faith in God that He was going to deliver, that He was going to make good on what His word and what His promises were. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, Abraham took his son Isaac, was going to sacrifice him. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Didn't God tell Abraham in this, I will make you, through Isaac, I will make you numerous. I will make you just going to be vast. And so now God wants him to sacrifice that descendant that's going to, fulfill God's word. So even though God he went ahead and he packed the donkeys and he took his helpers with him, and then him and Isaac went on. But Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead. Abraham knew that God could raise the dead. And figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead, really because he was willing to take this descendant, this promised descendant. A miracle. That was a miracle baby. That was from God. That was at 90-some and 100 years old. To me, that was another miracle baby. And now he's asked to sacrifice it. But Abraham knew that he had to obey God. That was the best path to go, is to obey God and have faith in God. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau and told them of their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, he blessed each one of Joseph's sons. Remember, they're down here in Egypt, and now Joseph, he's got old. He's got a bunch of sons and his family. So Jacob lived long enough to go to Egypt and to see Joseph and know that he was alive. And so he blessed his sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff or like a cane. He just had faith in God. By faith, Joseph, when the end was near, he spoke about the Exodus, when God was going to send help to get them out of Egypt. He spoke of that. He spoke of that before he died. And he gave instructions at that point. When God comes to get you and take us out of this bondage, take my bones. He wanted, by faith, he knew that God was going to make good on his promises. Don't leave me down. Don't leave my bones in Egypt, but take them with you. And so that was by faith. He knew the end was near. So by faith, he wanted, hey, take my bones with you, because the master and creator of the universe is coming to get us, and he's going to take us away from these Egyptians and get us out of this bondage. By faith, Moses' parents, I would say Moses' parents lived by faith. They hid that baby for 3 months. See, the Hebrews were getting so massive in Egypt that the Egyptians were a little bit fearful of the Hebrews because they were getting so massive. So the order went out to kill the baby boys, kill the baby boys. And so Moses, his parents hid him for 3 months.
The midwives did too, because they gave that to the midwives, and they feared God.
Yeah.
And so that they wouldn't too. So they lived by faith.
Yeah. So by faith, so they hid Moses because his parents saw that he was no ordinary child. He was not ordinary, and they were not afraid of the king's order. By faith, they were. It sounds like to me they were more afraid of God than they were the king's order. And that's the way to be, because God's going to make it happen. By faith, Moses, when he grew up, he refused. He didn't want to be known as Pharaoh's oldest son. He was a Hebrew. He chose to be mistreated along with his people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of the Egyptians for a very short time. A lot of times now, down here on earth, we look around and so many people want to enjoy just this living sinful, living fleshly, just for this short time. But we don't know that we won't get called up.
That's how long it is a short time.
And die while we still trying to have a good time in the flesh. So if you think about it, by faith,
thank you, dog.
Moses left Egypt. He didn't care if the king was mad. By faith, he left Egypt. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. He knew that God was able there to do. By faith, he kept the Passover. You know, we talked a few weeks ago about how the death angel was going to come to Egypt. That was going to be the very last plague. The death angel was going to come to Egypt and wipe out the firstborn. Not just the firstborn children, but the
firstborn
everything in the fields, cattle and so forth. And so, by faith, Moses kept that command. God gave him exact instructions on what was to happen, and Moses did that. Moses did follow that. And he put. Remember I walked over and he said, put the blood on the doorpost, and that death will pass by. And so he kept that. He was faithful. He knew that God. He knew that God was going to deliver. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. Now, if we go to the ocean today, if somebody tells you that we're going to walk across dry land, how many people's going to get in the water? Not a lot of people are going to do that. But the people, when they got to the Red Sea, the Lord parted them, and they went across just like out here on dry land. But by faith they did that. Well, the Egyptians, they tried to do that. We know what happened to them. They got drowned. Fish food. Okay, so what about? Okay, when God was telling them to march around this Jericho wall, remember? Yeah. They had to walk and march and march. They had faith to do that. They had to have faith to do that. Because again, what did God do? He gives specific instructions on what you need to do. So we had to have faith. They had to have faith. They couldn't do it. One time do it God's way, and the next time it's a shortcut. So many times today, you see people that will shortcut everything. But by faith, the walls of Jericho failed, just like God said they would if you do like I want you to do. After the people had marched around him for 7 days. Okay? We think about when we're going and the Egyptians were after them and they got swallowed up in the water. And so going over to the promised land was something else, wasn't it? The spies went out, had to spy it out to see what it looked like. Well, the spies didn't have really a whole lot good to say. There was 2 that had something good to say about it. And so they refused to go. They were afraid to go. But by faith, when the spies went over, Rahab, she welcomed the spies, Rahab, because they was not killed because she had faith. They told her that she wanted her family protected, and she protected the spies. She stepped out on faith. She opened her home up to spies that wasn't supposed to be there, and could have got the whole bunch killed. But God had a plan, and so they had faith. She had faith that they made a covenant with her that her family would be safe when Israel come in and marched on the city.